afternoon and welcome to the next concurrent session of the day, Equity and Inclusion using an Emporium Model approach in math intervention courses. Our presenters today are Kelly Coltis and Tyler Price. Kelly Coltis is an Assistant Director for Reach Math Resources at the University of Louisville. Additionally, she serves as instructor and course administrator for the Gen 103-104 program and coordinates the Calculus Preview and Math Accelerator Summer Bridge programs. Tyler Price is a coordinator for Reach Math Resources at the University of Louisville, serving as an instructor and course administrator for the Gen 103-104 program. He also facilitates the Brown-Forman Engineering Academy Summer Bridge program and supervises Reach's team of graduate teaching assistants. If you have any questions for the presenters during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for that nice warm welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Does that look okay?
That looks great.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to talk today, as mentioned, about equity inclusion using an Emporium Model approach in our math intervention courses here at the University of Louisville. I'm Kelly Coltis, and my colleague Tyler Price is presenting with me today.
All right, so in this session, we will be exploring the essential elements of Reach's intervention courses that we teach in mathematics and their grounding in the Emporium Model, as well as an incorporation of adaptive learning, mastery learning, and guided instruction. Not to give away the punchline too early here, but since adopting this approach, we've consistently achieved pass rates of approximately 70%. And the real exciting part is that our analysis shows no correlation between pass rate and ethnicity. We will share the steps that we've taken to redesign our courses in this presentation and discuss the features of the Emporium Model that have allowed us to achieve more equitable outcomes and an inclusive classroom environment. So just a little bit of context about our school, since context does matter in terms of what you all can take away from this. The University of Louisville is a state-supported research university in Louisville, Kentucky. The city of Louisville itself has approximately 600,000 people, whereas the metro area, which includes some counties in northern Kentucky and southern Indiana, has a population of around 1.3 million. The enrollment at U of L is a little over 23,000, with about 70% of those students being white and 30% minority students. And we're here on U of L's main Belknap campus in Old Louisville. A little bit about REACH as well, which is where me and Kelly both work. REACH stands for Resources for Academic Achievement. It has been the university's main academic support unit for the last 20 years or so. REACH is quite an operation. We offer a lot of things, including tutoring service, student success workshops, academic coaching, intervention courses, which we teach, as well as summer bridge programs. And all of these are free to U of L students. So in this presentation, we thought we would structure it with guiding questions and kind of answer those. So here are the questions we hope to answer throughout the course of the presentation. So we'll address what are equity and inclusion, kind of define our terms, discuss what is the Emporium Model, discuss the 10 essential elements of the Emporium Model, and then most of our presentation will be dedicated to the fourth question, which is what steps did we take to redesign our courses to use this model, and how did that impact our effort to advance equity and inclusion?
Okay, so guiding question one, what are equity and inclusion? So first, equity and equality are not the same thing. Equality in a classroom setting is where students are supported in the same way, regardless of their individual needs, whereas equity is where students are supported in a variety of ways in response to their individual needs. Inclusion is providing resources for students who may otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Some marginalized groups include minorities, underfinanced, first generation, disability, LGBT, adult learners, as well as several other groups. So some ideas for inclusive course design that we've pulled from the Chronicle of Higher Education are to design courses in which you, the instructor, are speaking less, giving a lot of low stakes quizzes and assessments, setting very clear expectations, communicating very clearly. Having a lot of structure is really, really good for all our students. It's a little good for some students and it's incredibly helpful to others. So structure is really, really good. And connecting with students personally, using their names, sharing pronouns, using different modes of communication, acknowledging hard times, understanding that they're a whole person, not just a student. They have jobs, they have families, they have other responsibilities and commitments and challenges, especially in the last few years, as you know. So sticking with guiding question one, one thing with math is that this achievement gap between white students and several minority groups has been well documented, especially on standardized tests and things of that nature. For our presentation and just in our everyday language, we've made a shift to, instead of referring to that as an achievement gap, as referring it to as an opportunity gap. That's a more equitable view for our students, and it kind of draws attention to and respects the fact that students have different circumstances and conditions, obstacles throughout their careers that are outside of their control. So it's not that they're not necessarily achieving, it's that they might have different opportunities and different resources. So we like to use the term opportunity gap, and we'd encourage anybody else to consider using that as well. But just small shifts in terminology help frame the way you think about situations. Having a solution-focused approach definitely promote equity in the classroom.
So guiding question 2 is a bit more straightforward, and I'm sure many of you have at least heard of the Emporium model, but we'll answer that question here. So what is the Emporium model? It's a way of delivering math that replaces traditional lectures with interactive instructional software and on-demand personalized assistance. So that move away from the traditional lecture format, we believe, allows teaching resources to be distributed equitably instead of equally. One major example is that in a lecture, students will get the same information at the same time. Typically, the lecturer will go up there, deliver a lesson to the students. It's the same lesson, everyone hears it the same way. And then students are pretty much expected to go on and do the content from there at pretty much the same pace for the most part. In the Emporium model, on the other hand, students work on their own customized curriculum with on-demand learning aids and assistance from staff. We'll talk a little bit later about how that curriculum is customized for our students, but it's obviously quite different from the traditional lecture format. And we believe that moving at this individualized pace, doing customized curriculum supports equity over equality in that way. Also, another benefit of the Emporium model is that since it's self-paced, we can more easily identify gaps in student understanding and recognize earlier when a student might need intervention or resources from other campus partners. So a lot of times in a lecture, the first exam may not be given for a few weeks into the semester, and that would be the time the professor would identify that. Whereas with our model, we can identify very quickly students who are falling behind and may need additional support.
And this isn't to say that lecture is bad and Emporium is good and that's the only way to do it. This is just our experience. I formerly taught high school in a somewhat lecture-based format with some like active learning activities and things that, you know, teachers like to use. When I came to U of L, I was honestly skeptical. The Emporium model seemed very different to me, and I was very unsure of how it was going to work, but I've kind of fallen in love with it. I feel like I can honestly get to know my students better in a lot of ways because you do have more one-on-one interactions with them, and you kind of know more information about them academically, and there's a little more room just to get to know them personally as well, in my experience. So there are things you can do though if you are in a lecture format or if you don't have access to all the things required to make the Emporium model work, you know, just pull bits and pieces, and everybody's probably already doing some of the things that are great for students that we're going to talk about today, and just keep doing those. Tyler,
Oh,
I think you're muted. Sorry.
sorry. So Kelly, this is yours, isn't it?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, it is. Sorry. So what are the essential elements of the Emporium model? So these were the key factors that we followed, the guidance we followed when we transitioned to the Emporium model. So one, we had to redesign the entire course sequence to establish greater course consistency. We have to meet in a computer lab and use instructional courseware, provide students with on-demand assistance from highly trained staff, build ongoing assessment and feedback, individualize the student experience, require active learning, require mastery learning. That's a really, really big one in our courses. Ensure sufficient time on task, monitor the student progress, and intervene as needed. As Tyler mentioned, you know, early intervention is key for a lot of our students to help them set them up for success early on. And then the final component is measuring learning completion and cost.
All right, so we've got to guiding question 4, which is where we will spend most of our time kind of discussing what we here at Reach have done to redesign our intervention math courses using an Emporium model approach. So we'll discuss those 10 essential elements that Kelly just mentioned on the next several slides, and then we'll kind of talk in there throughout how those steps have enabled us to achieve more equitable outcomes in our student population. So as Kelly mentioned, the first essential element is to redesign the entire course sequence and establish greater course consistency. So as I'm sure many of you know, one of the biggest hurdles in a series of developmental classes are drop-off points. You don't necessarily want a large number of classes for students to take before they actually get to their credit-bearing course, because at any one of those points, they could potentially have to retake the class, may drop out or get discouraged. So we have tried here at the University of Louisville to simplify that process down quite a bit. So you can see on the left there, before we redesigned our courses, there were 3 prerequisite classes students had to take: pre-algebra, basic algebra, and intermediate algebra, before moving on to their credit-bearing math class over in the math department. After our course redesigned, you can see it's quite a bit simpler. We have 2 different tracks for students, depending on whether they are a STEM major, which basically means requiring college algebra or beyond, or a non-STEM major. So non-STEM majors can take Gen 103 and then go directly into the quantitative reasoning course, which is a basic math credit. Students who need college algebra or beyond will take Gen 104. And then move directly into Math 111. So it is quite a bit simpler and removes a lot of those attrition points along the way. And here we have a table outlining a few of the differences between our old courses, Math 55, 65, and 85. They were developmental classes, whereas we try to frame ours as intervention courses. It was a very traditional classroom, lecture-based, met a couple times a week for a lecture, and then students did work outside of class on their own. We use a math lab here at U of L, and facilitate the class with a graduate student assistant or professional staff member, along with a team of tutors. The old classes were lecture-based, whereas we use guided instruction with very little lecturing outside of the first couple weeks. And we try to abide by that principle of speaking less and devoting more of class time to active learning. The old courses used a textbook, whereas we use, of course, Hawks's instructional courseware, as well as a guided notebook, which we've developed. And then finally, the old classes were graded on a traditional ABCF scale, whereas we are graded pass-fail with Gen 103, 104.
Okay, so essential element 2 of the Emporium model is to meet in a computer lab and use instructional courseware. So our Gen 103 and Gen 104 courses are computer-based. They meet twice a week for 50 minutes in a computer lab. We do offer a small number of seats of online Gen 103, 104, but the Emporium model is truly the in-person version of our course. For example, this semester we have about 450 on-site students with 100 online seats, and that's mostly due to being sensitive to student needs around COVID. Last semester was 750 on-site, 100 online. So that's students who did not want to come to campus or were not, feeling safe to come to campus. Good. But the Emporium model truly is much more suited for the face-to-face courses. All of our sections use Hawks Learning. Students complete all of their required assignments in the courseware. And we have 35 lessons that we've customized for cumulative quizzes and a common final exam. So every quiz we give is cumulative in nature to try to get them to retrieve some of that old information several times by the time they've got to the final. We do have an attendance policy for our face-to-face classes. Attendance and active participation are required. This is really, really important. It gives a lot of structure to our students, and a lot of our students need a lot of structure. We monitor attendance in multiple ways, both physically by walking around, with a clipboard, checking off who's here. And we also use a system called Tutor Track, which some of you may be familiar with. We use that in our tutoring centers as well as our classroom, so that students log in and log out. So we have timestamps on either end of their visits. Currently, our policy is to require students to attend at least 80% of the class sessions, which equates to 6 classes that they can miss, for any reasons, no questions asked. If they miss more than 6, still no questions asked. They just need to make up their time by the last day of classes. So if they've exceeded 6 absences, let's say they missed the 7th time, that's okay. They just need to make up their time, because we know that the more time we have the students in the lab with us, actively participating and asking questions, the better off it is for everybody. We obviously acknowledge that students have a lot of additional challenges right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This policy is quite a bit more flexible than it used to be, especially the fact that they can make classes up all the way till the end of the semester, the last day of classes. We previously used to have them make it up within 2 weeks. That obviously doesn't work very well, if people need to quarantine or, whatever. So we'll kind of see how things go, but this has been the policy we've used this entire school year, and it's actually worked out really well. I was nervous about letting people go all the way to the last day of classes, assuming that some students might try to marathon all their time in the last week. And in the fall, with 750 on-site students, we maybe had 5 to 10 students try to do that. Everybody else was pretty decent on coming when they could, and if they needed to miss, they had the flexibility to do that.
Right, so essential element 3 is very important, and that's providing students with on-demand assistance from a highly trained staff. So our courses here at Reach are facilitated by graduate teaching assistants, we have 4 graduate teaching assistants that work alongside our 6 professional staff members. So we do teach quite a lot of courses each semester between all of us. The training for our graduate teaching assistants is pretty rigorous. We do have a comprehensive instructor's guide that we've developed here in-house that we have our GSAs read over, and then we each do activities together as a group, talk about that. We have in-person and online training. We have a nice in-person training session for 2 weeks before the semester gets going over the summer. And then online, we have them complete modules and do additional training outside of their in-person training. A couple tips for how we've fostered inclusion, at least in our courses. We do have a welcome form students fill out. It's just a Microsoft form that asks some basic questions about the student, helps us get to know them, but one important question is requesting pronouns, so we can respect how everyone wants to be addressed, and along with other questions that kind of get at their perceived math ability. Our graduate teaching assistants also do a disability resource center module. That's because, as you know, in developmental math, you have students with all kinds of different needs, and it is good to be aware of the learning challenges your students may have. We also have developed activities to bring awareness to the diversity of our student body, because as we've mentioned before, U of L is quite a diverse campus, and we get a very diverse set of students in our classes. Throughout the semester, the training doesn't quite end there. We do have weekly staff meetings where we come together as a group to provide updates in the class and discuss issues. Each of our graduate teaching assistants also meets with the professional staff mentor each week to discuss specific student issues. So there is a lot of communication there, especially in an operation this large. And then finally, at the end of the semester, we conduct observations and evaluations of our graduate teaching assistants so they can get feedback on their performance over the semester. Our tutors, on the other hand, we do use peer tutors in each of our classrooms. We do think that's very important because we believe peer tutors can reduce math anxiety and stereotype threat. I think they do that because I found, a lot of our students do enjoy asking questions from fellow students. They like learning from people that are near their age range, might share some more similarities than just one instructor might with the class. For our tutors, our training includes both in-person and online training again, that is approved by the College Reading and Learning Association, math activities, along with observation and evaluations by professional staff. It's one thing we really do stress in our training is that all staff members should be active when they seek to help students. So we train them to approach students if they seem to be struggling or seem kind of like they're having, a difficulty while working on problems. We don't want our students to suffer in silence. So a big thing we push is to actively greet people as they come in and check on them during class.
And I know it sounds like a lot of structure for our teaching team, but it really does help. I mean, structure, we said, is obviously good for our students, but it's good for our staff and a lot of our graduate teaching assistants. This may be like their first professional type job. So they have a lot of good questions, and we really get to know them well and get to support them in that way. So we've actually had semesters where things came up and we had to, cancel 2 or 3 Friday meetings in a row for whatever reason, weather or something. And they actually said they missed it, which is good because usually people don't miss meetings, but we try to keep it short and sweet and to the point, and also just kind of chit chat a little bit to get to know one another. So essential element 4 is building in ongoing assessment and feedback. We use Hawk's Learning for this. This has been fantastic. Students get so much feedback instantly as they're practicing, as they're doing their certifies. This has been really, really helpful for students because especially if they are working, in the dorm room or at home or whatever, there's so much structure and feedback in place. They can often, make their way through a lesson and then maybe come to class with a few questions instead of starting from scratch. So it makes them a lot more independent and in control of their own learning. The courseware features that we like for students, obviously the learning aids are very, very good. The video clips are great. We have a generation of students. I'm like twice their age, but I also enjoy YouTubing anything I need. Instead of having to go do that, the video clips are already embedded in learn mode. There's a little watch button in the learn mode where you can just watch the videos that the students really like. You can add your own videos. We haven't done that piece yet, but that part has been really, really helpful. There's great notes in there. Our guided notebook follows the learn mode. The animated examples, the step-by-steps, the explanations, and the practice modes, all those our students really, really like and find very, very useful. The instant feedback is super helpful, and it's also very good feedback. It's not just a canned answer of how you could do the problem. It sort of diagnoses based on what answer they put, what the mistake may have been if they missed a question. So students do really like that, and it's adaptive. For instructors, we love being able to customize the content. The reporting features are great. As somebody, like I mentioned, coming from high school, where I graded by hand all the things for several years, it's wonderful to have that part done, and you can spend your time on these reports that automatically are created, and you can actually analyze where there's gaps, how many students missed what question on which test, and it makes it easier to pinpoint gaps, and it saves a lot of time and allows you to use your time and your training much more useful in a much more useful way. Ooh, sorry, Tyler, there you go.
All right, so essential element 5 is to individualize the student experience. That's another very important piece to delivering kind of equitable education so that everybody is getting exactly what they need, as little or as much as help as they need. That's mostly done through a pre-assessment test, which we do proctor in person for our on-site classes, Respondus for our online classes. This is the second day of class after we do our syllabus talk on the first day. Second day, the first thing students do is come in and take a pre-assessment test. This takes a couple questions from most of the lessons in the courses, gives the students an opportunity to demonstrate that they know how to do that content. And if they can, then they can test out of lessons and only be required to do the lessons that they haven't demonstrated they already know how to do. We also allow students to complete the course at any time, so we don't set some maximum speed at which they can progress through. They can move through as quickly as they like. Students who do finish the course early have 2 opportunities to take the final exam. So we do try to push that as an incentive to finish early because we want to get people through and onto their next course. If students are returning, meaning that they failed the class in a previous semester, we don't make them start over back at square one. We give them a midterm exam, which test them on all the material in the first half of the class, and then they start at the midpoint and work through the lessons from there. So a lot of returning students do like that they aren't required to retake the entire class over again. Recently, in the last few years, we've developed a program that allows students to complete both Gen 103 and 104 in the same semester. That is a big deal because that cuts down the sequence of developmental classes even more to 1, and for the students who can move through very quickly. Out of the 850 students in the fall of 2021, I believe we had around 30 to participate in the half semester course. And this semester we're looking at 10 to 12 or so students out of our 550. So it's not a huge number, but for those students who are able to move through the material more quickly, they can really benefit from doing so, saving tuition money, saving a lot of time, and just getting to their next math course a lot faster.
Yeah, and one comment about Respondus, it's an okay tool. There are some criticisms of it. You just have to be careful in how you use it. It often flags people in a way that might not be equitable. Don't trust the flags if you use Respondus. We found that they've been of very little value. But it's really important if you do use Respondus to click through the thumbnails. When we watch videos, we plan about 5 minutes per video, like looking at the thumbnails, making sure there's nobody else in the room, carefully watching their environment check at the beginning. And that's been pretty good for us, without having to watch the whole thing, but also not trusting the flags, because that has not been useful for us with that particular program. Essential element 6, require active learning. No lecture means that students are actively doing math problems during class, whether it's practice mode or they're taking a certify or a quiz or asking questions. They're actively working on math. I like to use the analogy for them, like you can watch ESPN and watch basketball players, or you can go practice playing basketball. Which one's going to make you a better player, right? You can watch a lecture, or you can actually practice doing the math problems, and actually doing the math has a much better long-lasting effect for the students. They have the learn mode where they can pause it and stop it and ask questions as they go through. They use their guided notebooks when they're in learn mode. Instructors and tutors are available for on-demand help. That usually ends up being one-on-one because students are all over the place on different lessons, so it's kind of hard to group them. And sometimes students can be a little shy. That's why it's good to kind of get talking with them, even if it's not about math, so they feel comfortable asking a question. And usually once a few kids in class ask questions, it normalizes it, and then you get a lot of questions. And we have a math resource center. That's our tutoring drop-in center for math that is available for assistance throughout the week. So if students want more help outside of class time, they can drop in there and get as much help as they need.
Element 7 is requiring mastery learning. That is a very big principle in the Emporium model. It serves a couple of purposes. First of all, if they can get a 80% on their assignments, that does demonstrate they have some level of mastery over the material. So in our class, students are allowed unlimited retakes until they achieve that 80. So that really does take pressure off of them as they're completing their assignments or their quizzes. It feels a lot more low stakes knowing that if they turn in a low grade, that won't be their permanent grade. They'll have to carry on through the rest of the semester. Our common final exam is kind of the thing we build up to all semester. At the very end, after they've completed all their lessons and their quizzes, they take our final. We lower the bar just a little bit on that to demonstrate mastery. It is a 70%, which is required to pass that exam instead of the 80. So a lot of students, by the time they've done these problems and got an 80 so many times, a lot of them do find it a lot easier to pass with the 70%. We allow a maximum of 2 attempts for those who finish early, and students do have to pass that exam in order to pass the course. So we are really building up to that throughout the semester.
Okay, essential element 8 is to ensure sufficient time on task. We do this with Hawks reports. We have all of our instructors complete a weekly progress and time log for each of their classes. It's just an Excel spreadsheet with certain things that we're looking for, like time in lessons, time in web tests, automatically adding those together, and a few other things, if they're behind or ahead, or how many lessons behind if they are behind, those types of things. Our graduate assistants, have gotten pretty slick with those. It doesn't take them too long, maybe an hour, hour and a half, and they each have 90 students. So we try to not belabor it, but we do like to capture, weekly progress and time logs. And then we can kind of easily see, hey, this person used to spend 200 minutes or 100 minutes or whatever it was, and then all of a sudden in week 3 or week 5 or whatever, something happened and they stopped working. So it's easy to see that maybe there's something else going on outside of school. Maybe they need support. Like, let's just talk to them and see if there's anything we can do to help, because they were doing lots of time and now they're not. Sometimes they've started a job and it's overwhelming, and sometimes it's something else that needs attention. So We do give pacing guides. Students love these. We don't print much anymore. Most stuff is digital in our courses, but we do print a pacing guide for every student. It is the entire semester on the front side of one piece of paper. So they can put it in their binder. Some students like to cross it off or highlight it or check mark it or whatever as they complete lessons. But you can see an example there on the screen of, these lessons need to be done this week. We give Friday 5 p.m. deadlines on everything because we know people have work obligations and other things. So as long as they get it done sometime during the week by Friday, it's considered on time. If they do miss a deadline for a lesson, it does not lock out on them. They can do it late and they can do it for full credit in our class. So those are the lessons. The quizzes, we do give hard deadlines, meaning that if they miss their deadline, it will lock them out, but they can just request an extension. We do have absolute deadlines.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just need to give you a quick 10-minute time heads up, but everything's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have an absolute last day. We'll accept quizzes. And we call those absolute deadlines, but I'll try to.
Yeah, I'll have to pick up the pace here just a little bit, it seems. Essential element 9 is to monitor student progress and intervene. Again, very important to identify students who are falling behind and need additional support. Hawks has a ton of great reporting features for that. And here are some of our favorites we use as we're doing our progress logs, or just to look and get a snapshot of the students as they are. All student scores is a great way to see your classroom at a glance. Detailed student grades has more information than the all student scores report, gives your individual times, things like that. Time per lesson / student. The time per student report is great because that shows you exactly how long each individual student spends on their lessons. If they're very long, you might ask that student if they're struggling with the lessons and maybe offer support there. If they're very short, that will tip you off that perhaps they're cheating on their lessons. So either way, it is good to look at those to see how your students are doing. The other ones listed there are very useful as well for different situations. Another thing we do to help monitor our student progress is the use of our deadline extension form, like Kelly mentioned. So if a student misses a quiz deadline, it will lock them out until they've completed this form. It's very easy to find. We've linked the form in Hawks. It's a tab at the top under a materials tab is what we call it. In this form, we just try to ask some basic questions to give us an idea of how the student's doing, both kind of mentally, academically. So they're very open-ended. Just ask them how they're doing in the semester so far. A lot of times students will disclose stuff that's slowing down their progress or the challenges they're facing. So I found that that form has been really useful because I found people will write sometimes more than they will say in person. We do have staff follow up if we get anything concerning as a response, reach out to them and refer them to campus resources. So that's been a great way to catch people who are struggling, because a lot of classes freshmen might take, they might be in a large lecture hall where a teacher doesn't really know who they are. So we feel like this is a great way to connect with freshmen and actually get them to campus resources if they do need that. If students miss deadlines by more than 2 weeks, then we kind of up our game before we allow them to or extend their deadline once again. We meet with them personally for a plan of action meeting. In this meeting, we just basically talk privately with them about how they're doing, kind of to try to determine the reason they're falling behind, whether that's a busy work schedule or class schedule, personal issues, and then kind of refer them to different resources from there. We do develop a plan to get caught back up in the course and then set a new deadline for them to finish after we meet. This meeting is all documented. We do save little copies of that so we can look back and track students across the semester. On those documents, we list all the resources we offer through Reach and give them that new deadline for them to finish their quiz by.
Okay, so essential element 10 is measuring learning completion and cost. We'll mostly talk about measuring learning here and a little bit completion. As you can see, we had a dip in since 2020, sorry, as everybody knows.
What happened there?
Yeah, but for several semesters and years straight, we were above the 70% mark. We're happy to report in the fall, which is not reflected in this graph, but in the fall we had a 63% pass rate, which was a kind of a nice comeback. Before 2016, we were using a different product. We were not using Hawks, and we were also required to give the Compass test as our final exam. So we were really grateful to make a couple of really key changes. And since we have switched to Hawks and been able to write our own final exam, we've had much higher success rates. Another thing we track that's really important to us is that at least 70% of our students who pass our class go on to pass their next course, which is, kind of the whole point. So that's really good to see that our students are successful in the math department and that we've prepared them well. Okay, this is the really exciting news for us. I've shown a few graphs from the last 3 years. We've taken a closer look at pass rate and ethnicity. And we're really happy to report that after we've done, show this and I'll go back, the Pearson's chi-square test of association was performed. We found no association between ethnicity and pass rate on any of these recent academic years that we've analyzed. The nice thing about that is, 1.5 years were pre-pandemic and 1.5 years were since the pandemic on the data that we're showing. And even during the pandemic, even though unfortunately pass rates weren't as good as before, there's still no association between ethnicity and pass rate, which is really exciting to hear. Really happy for our students that that has been the case because we know the pandemic has disproportionately affected different groups. But thankfully, in our classes with our pass rates, they've shown no association in these years that we've recently been looking at. So we have some recommended resources here. Some of them are nice articles if you're just kind of wanting to bring something back to your department. Some of them are kind of short, easy to digest articles with links for more in-depth, academic research listed below. So I linked all those. In the Emporium Model design, we also linked that website for you. Tyler, sorry, I stole
So
yours.
we hope we've answered at least our guiding questions that we put forth, talking about what are equity inclusion, what's the Emporium model, discuss the essential elements. And then I hope that as we talked about some of the changes we've made, whether you use the Emporium model or not, I'm sure there are some things that you can hopefully pull from that to make your classroom environment more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been really insightful, and we so appreciate your time and sharing your experience. We will open up the floor to Q&A at this time. And I agree, Tyler, y'all did really cover any questions, but we did have one question come up. Are the peer tutors paid?
Yes. Yes, they are. And we thankfully have been able to raise in the last year our starting pay to $12 an hour, which is still not as good as some other campus jobs, but at least it's something. But yes, they are paid. They can get
$13.50.
they can get raises based on their training and experience. So
wonderful. Thank you. Everyone, if you have any questions, you can feel free to go ahead and enter those into the Q&A box. We'll probably have just time for one more question since we are coming up on our time at this time.
Sorry, that was definitely me.
No, this is great.
We practiced yesterday and it was faster, but
it's okay. No, they'll have a lot of great material to share. it looks like we don't have any other questions at this time. So I just want to thank you, Kelly and Tyler, for your time and your expertise today, and such a wonderful session. And thank you to all of our attendees who have come today. I went ahead and put in the chat box some links to our next upcoming sessions, as well as a link to the Hawks virtual booth and the Hawks virtual bookshelf. So just to let you know, the next concurrent session will begin at 4 o'clock Eastern, so you have a little bit of a break. You can go ahead and view the chat for those links to the new sessions. And while accessing our conference website, don't forget to swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to my colleagues on the Hawks team. If you stick around for a 5-minute demonstration, you will be entered to win the hourly giveaway, your choice of a 6-month subscription to Audible, 1-year subscription to Disney Plus, or $100